Hello, this is Michael from Heroic Lives. I just wanted to give a little preface to what you're about to hear. This is a podcast look at Constantine. Just remember, Constantine is not canonized in the Catholic Church. He is in some other denominations, such as some of the Orthodox churches. However, I think the issue is he delayed baptism. That is, he waited until the end of his life, despite being convinced that Christ was who he said he was, and that the Catholic Church was, in fact, the true church. His waiting allowed him to act however he wanted because he knew, as Eusebius tells us, that baptism removes both sin and punishment for sin. So the later in life you get baptized, seemingly the less punishment you have. This is very risky because, especially as a Roman emperor, there were so many assassinations or ways to die quickly where baptism may not be an option, but Constantine chose to do that, and it succeeded for him. He was pretty ruthless with his enemies. He fought many battles and felt a certain freedom in delaying baptism until the end of his life. I also wanted to add that of the two presenters, that there is some questioning based on some modern historians about the vision seen at Malvern Hill right before the battle. I'm not sure that's worth spending any time on because there are multiple sources besides Eusebius that show that this vision was part of the entire battle, that the soldiers painted the cross or Chi Rho, which is just a cross with a little C on it, or it looks something like that. And by this sign, he will conquer. And in fact, he did. And clearly, if this were completely made up, Eusebius, who was a contemporary of his, would have suspected that. So I don't find much interest in that. But anyway, I wanted to let you know those few things before the podcast gets going. Enjoy learning about Constantine because even if he's not a saint, quite possibly for his choice to delay baptism so long, he did die in the church, baptized, which is what we all hope to do. And he did allow Christians to go out in public again. I should say go out in public for the first time because they had been in house churches and in hiding due to persecutions. And for the first time, they could build churches. They could take temples, eventually take temples like the Pantheon and reconsecrate them to Christianity. It was the moment in which Catholicism came out of the shadows and into the public light. And that's something that we should all be thankful for because it may have taken a lot longer, and who knows how history would have gone. Enjoy listening.
All right, let's dive in. Today we are going all the way back to the 4th century, to the Roman Empire. We're going to be talking about the life and times of Constantine the Great, the very first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity. And we have some exciting sources for you today.
We're working with excerpts from two different works. The first is called The Life of Constantine, and the second one is called Constantine's Oration to the Assembly of the Saints.
Oh, very cool.
Both of these were written by Eusebius.
Okay.
Now, Eusebius was a historian who was actually pretty close with Constantine himself, so these writings offer a really intimate look into Constantine's world.
Wow. All right, so imagine this. The Roman Empire, steeped in all of its pagan tradition, and then suddenly you have Constantine the Emperor embracing this faith that had often been persecuted. It's a very interesting story.
Yeah, it's a pivotal moment.
So why the sudden change? I mean, was this a genuine spiritual awakening, or was there something a little more strategic going on?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? And, Eusebius, he paints a pretty dramatic picture of Constantine's conversion.
I bet.
He describes this vision that Constantine had right before a very important battle.
Okay.
Supposedly, he saw a cross in the sky.
Whoa.
With the words, "In this sign, conquer."
Really? Wow.
And this event, this vision that he had a really profound impact on Constantine. It ended up shaping his beliefs and ultimately his entire reign.
Now, hold on a second. This vision story, it's pretty incredible, but some historians have raised questions about, how true it actually is.
Oh, absolutely. There's definitely debate around it.
What are some of the arguments against it?
Well, some historians argue that the vision might have been a later invention, maybe a way to kind of legitimize Constantine's rule and his, sudden embrace of Christianity.
It's interesting.
Others suggest that it could have been just a misinterpretation of a natural phenomenon. And remember, we're basing all of this on Eusebius' account.
Yeah.
And he was very clearly writing with a very strong, pro-Constantine bias.
I see, so we should take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
But what's so fascinating is that, even if we just completely set aside this vision story, there's no denying the impact Constantine's conversion had on the Roman Empire. I mean, it's huge.
It was massive. It was a complete turning point.
Totally.
Constantine, he didn't just convert personally. He also actively championed Christianity. He poured resources into building these incredible churches.
Right.
A perfect example is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
This church, it was built on the site of Jesus's crucifixion and resurrection. So it wasn't just a place of worship, it was a really powerful symbol of Constantine's commitment to this new Christian faith.
Yeah. He also issued these edicts that were promoting religious freedom for Christians,
Right.
which was a huge change from the persecution that, Christians had faced before.
It was a 180.
And then, get this, he even started to incorporate Christian symbols into Roman iconography.
Yeah. Can you believe that?
I mean, we're talking Roman coins and military standards bearing the Chi-Rho, the first two letters of Christ's name in Greek.
Exactly.
Such a bold statement.
Oh, it was a very deliberate message. Christianity was no longer this fringe movement in Roman society. It was being brought right to the very center.
Wow.
And that was, as we said, a turning point, not just for Christianity, but really for the whole future of the Roman Empire.
Okay, but here's where things take a bit of a twist.
Yeah.
Constantine, despite all of this outward piety, wasn't actually baptized until he was literally on his deathbed.
You're kidding.
Why wait so long?
That's the question, right?
I mean, was he, I don't know, hedging his bets, or was something else going on?
It's a good question. One that has actually puzzled historians for centuries.
I bet.
One theory is that Constantine, he was aware of his own sins.
I mean, sure.
And he might have wanted to delay baptism until the very end to make sure that he had, a completely clean slate before entering the afterlife.
So basically, delaying forgiveness.
Well, yeah.
Smart, but also kind of ruthless.
A little bit.
Classic Constantine, I guess.
Yeah, very much so. Constantine was a very complex figure. I mean, he was obviously a devout believer, but he was also a pragmatist.
Yeah, he was.
He was navigating a very turbulent political landscape. And some argue that this delayed baptism was actually a very strategic move.
Okay.
A way to maintain kind of a balance between his Christian faith and, the very real realities of power.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But let's not forget about the turmoil that was happening within the early church itself. We keep hearing about this Arian controversy. What was that all about?
So the Arian controversy was a massive theological debate that basically rocked the early church.
Okay.
And it really all centered around the nature of Christ.
Okay.
So we have this priest from Alexandria named Arius.
Arius. Okay.
And he argued that Jesus was a created being. He was subordinate to God the Father.
Okay, so he was saying Jesus wasn't fully divine.
Exactly. And this idea, it directly challenged the doctrine of the Trinity, which, holds that God is one being existing in three co-equal persons, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
So that must have caused quite a stir.
Oh, it did. The Arian controversy created this incredibly deep rift within the whole Christian community.
Wow.
And this was a challenge that Constantine, as this self-proclaimed protector of the church, felt like he absolutely had to address.
And this is where the Council of Nicaea comes in, right?
Yes.
That gathering of bishops that Constantine convened to, settle the matter.
It was a huge deal.
I mean, we're definitely going to have to dig deeper into that later.
For sure.
Okay, so we've got Constantine, this newly converted emperor, right? He's trying to, wrangle this church. It's completely divided over some very fundamental, very basic beliefs. It's got to be tough.
Oh, it was a super delicate balancing act for sure. Constantine saw himself as this defender of the faith.
Right.
But he was also a very shrewd politician. He knew that a unified church would make his empire much stronger.
Right.
Whereas, one that was fractured could lead to instability.
For sure. So he calls for this huge meeting, right? The Council of Nicaea.
Yeah.
In 325 AD. And hundreds of bishops from all across the empire, they all show up to debate the true nature of Christ. I mean, I can only imagine how intense it must have been in that room.
Oh, I bet. It was a landmark event. I mean, imagine this. For the very first time, the Christian world was attempting to actually establish a unified doctrine. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
Constantine himself presided over the council
Really?
because he was so eager to see this Arian controversy resolved.
Hold on. So the emperor is like leading a theological debate. That seems a little out of his, realm of expertise, doesn't it?
Well, Constantine, he saw his role as going beyond just the secular leadership thing.
Okay.
He believed he had this spiritual responsibility to actually guide the church. Remember how Eusebius portrays him?
Yeah.
As a divinely appointed ruler, chosen by God to spread Christianity.
Right. That whole chosen one thing. But, I mean, let's be real. He definitely also had a vested interest in keeping the peace within the empire. A unified church meant a stable empire, which was good for him politically, right?
Oh, of course. I mean, there were definitely political motivations at play here. But it's also really clear that Constantine took his faith very, very seriously. Like, he genuinely wanted to see the church succeed.
Okay.
And he really believed that resolving this Arian controversy was, absolutely essential to that goal.
Yeah. So what happened at Nicaea? Like, did they actually manage to settle this debate?
Well, after literally weeks of these superheated discussions, they finally condemned Arius's teachings
Okay.
and affirmed that, yes, Christ was divine, and then they drafted the Nicene Creed,
Oh, wow.
which is this, statement of faith that declared that Jesus was God from God, light from light, true God from true God.
Oh, wow.
Essentially, they were trying to establish the doctrine of the Trinity as the official belief of the church.
So that's where the Nicene Creed comes from. I mean, I've heard it said in church so many times, but I never actually knew the origin of it. So that means Constantine basically got what he wanted, a unified church.
Yeah.
Case closed. Right?
Well, not quite. The Arian controversy, it didn't just vanish overnight.
Right.
Arianism continued to have followers,
Okay.
And that debate over the nature of Christ, it just continued to simmer for centuries.
Okay, so much for a quick fix.
Exactly.
But Constantine's efforts to unify the church, they were definitely a step in the right direction.
For sure.
But it's just the beginning. It was the beginning of a very, very long and complex process.
Yeah, and it kind of shows that these religious doctrines, they evolve over time.
Yeah.
Often through a lot of debate and disagreement.
Right.
Even with the emperor backing, this one particular view.
Right.
True unity, it takes time and dialogue.
Totally. Okay, let's get back to Constantine for a minute. And we talked about his conversion and his support for the church, and his efforts to resolve these theological disputes. But Eusebius, he mentioned some things about Constantine's reign that weren't so,
That's so great.
Yeah, not so great. Like, wasn't he also responsible for some pretty brutal actions?
Well, yes. Constantine's reign, it was definitely marked by some violence and some pretty serious political maneuvering. He had rivals,
Oh, yeah?
even family members, executed to really solidify his power.
Wow.
And he wasn't really above using force to just completely suppress anyone who opposed his rule.
That doesn't sound very Christian of him.
Mm-hmm.
How do we, reconcile this with his supposed devotion to the faith?
Well, it's definitely complicated. I mean, some argue that Constantine's actions were necessary to keep things stable in such a, turbulent era.
Yeah.
Others see those actions as evidence of his ruthlessness and his, ambition. It's really important to keep in mind that he was a product of his time. We're talking about a time when violence was often seen as a perfectly acceptable tool of statecraft.
Right. So was he a sincere believer? Or was he just a power-hungry ruler who was using Christianity to just further his own agenda?
I mean, honestly, it was probably a bit of both.
Yeah.
Constantine was a walking contradiction. He was capable of incredible piety, but also great cruelty. I mean, he was driven by faith, but also by ambition. And it's this complexity that makes him such a fascinating figure to really study.
Yeah. I guess we can't expect, historical figures to fit neatly into our very modern categories of good or bad, right?
Exactly.
They were real people who were dealing with real challenges.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
And trying to understand their motivations, their choices, even the ones that seem totally contradictory, that's what makes history so engaging.
Yeah, I agree. Speaking of choices, let's talk about Constantine's methods for actually spreading Christianity. We've talked about how he loved building churches and, promoting religious freedom. But Eusebius, he kind of hints that things weren't always so peaceful. What's up with that?
Well, while Constantine definitely favored Christianity,
Yeah.
his approach to spreading the faith wasn't always, gentle persuasion. There were definitely instances where pagan temples were destroyed
Oh, wow.
and non-Christian practices were suppressed.
So not exactly, a live and let live approach to religious diversity, huh?
Not entirely, no. And it kind of shows that even a ruler who supports religious freedom can still sometimes be tempted to use force, especially when it's convenient for them.
Yeah. It's a question that's still relevant today, isn't it? Like, where do we actually draw the line between promoting a faith and actually forcing it on other people?
Yeah, good question.
Definitely something to think about.
For sure. Constantine's reign, it raises these really important questions about the relationship between religion and power. You
Yeah.
know, and those questions are still totally relevant, even today, in our own time.
Okay, so we've really been digging into like all these complexities of Constantine's reign, and how he was navigating that world of, early Christianity. And it seems pretty clear that he saw himself as a champion of the faith,
For sure.
but also as this really shrewd political player. It makes you wonder, like, how did he even view the role of the emperor in relation to the church?
Well, that's a great question. And honestly, Constantine, he was always walking this very fine line.
Okay.
He believed in the separation of church and state.
Okay.
But he also saw himself as having this, spiritual responsibility
I see.
to protect and really even guide the church.
So he wasn't trying to become some kind of priest king, but he wasn't exactly hands off either.
Yeah, exactly. He believed the emperor had this duty
Okay.
to ensure the well-being of the church. And that even meant stepping in and intervening in, these theological disputes if it was necessary. Think back to the Council of Nicaea.
Yeah. Yep.
Constantine, he didn't just call the meeting.
Right.
He also actually participated in all the discussions.
Wow.
And even used his influence to push for an actual resolution, to this whole Arian controversy.
It's so interesting to me how Constantine was so willing to, get involved in those really detailed theological debates.
Yeah.
I mean, you would think that an emperor would have other, more pressing concerns, running an empire.
Well, to Constantine, the health of the church and the stability of the empire, they were both super important.
Yeah.
And he saw them as being deeply connected. Like a unified church, it basically meant a strong and prosperous empire.
So for him, supporting Christianity wasn't just about his own personal piety. It was a matter of, good governance.
Exactly. And his support for the church, it went beyond just words. Remember, Eusebius actually describes how Constantine poured tons of resources into building churches, funding all the clergy, and even granting these tax exemptions to church properties.
Right.
I mean, these were some really significant actions.
Yeah, they were.
And it really helped solidify Christianity's position in the Roman world.
Yeah. It's amazing how fast Christianity went from being this persecuted sect to the, officially favored religion of the empire.
Right. It's
hard to even imagine such a dramatic shift happening so quickly.
Well, it really is a testament to Constantine's influence and his complete commitment to Christianity. He really put all the weight of the empire behind the faith.
Yeah.
And that, without a doubt, sped up its spread.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing, right? I mean, there were still people in the empire who were resisting this wave of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
How did Constantine deal with that?
Well, while Constantine really did promote religious tolerance, he wasn't afraid to use force, against people who were threatening the peace or the stability of the empire. Right. We were talking about the destruction of those pagan temples before. Well, that was part of his strategy, to consolidate his power.
Okay.
And to make sure that everyone was unified under this, banner of Christianity.
So he was basically walking this tightrope between, promoting religious freedom,
Right.
but then also using force to just maintain order.
Yeah, pretty much.
It sounds like a really tough legacy to unpack.
It really is. I mean, Constantine, he was definitely a man of his time. And his actions, they reflect that, the reality of power in the ancient world,
Yeah.
But his reign also just raises these important questions that we still ask ourselves today about the role of religion in society, the right balance between faith and politics, the limits of tolerance. These are questions that we're still wrestling with.
It's like, Constantine's story is a mirror,
Yeah.
and it's reflecting back at us.
That's a good way to put it.
It's challenging us to think about our own beliefs, our own values.
Exactly. I mean, his reign, it marked this incredible turning point in history. Christianity went from the shadows,
Yeah.
to becoming this dominant force in the world.
Wow.
And the choices that he made, the contradictions,
Right.
they're still shaping how we understand this whole relationship between faith and power.
So what can we, living in the 21st century, really take away from all of this? I mean, Constantine lived so long ago. Why should his story even matter to us now?
That's a good question. Constantine's legacy, it reminds us that, religion and politics, it's complicated.
It is.
It's messy.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that even leaders with the best intentions can make decisions that have consequences they never even thought of.
Right.
And it reminds us that this quest for unity and understanding in religion, it's a journey.
It is.
And it takes empathy, it takes dialogue, and it takes a willingness to really, grapple with some very, very difficult questions.
It seems like that's what these deep dives are all about.
Yeah.
Asking the tough questions, challenging assumptions, and recognizing that, history, it's never black and white. There's always more to discover, more layers to uncover. So keep exploring, keep questioning, and, keep diving deep. We'll see you on the next one.